Okay, now we're going to talk about the humerus. So the humerus is the largest bone in your upper limb. Okay. So here at the top, we've kind of talked about the head of the humerus. This is what articulates with the scapula. So we'll go ahead and look at the details so that we can look at this in color. We'll zoom in and keep zooming in and keep zooming in. Okay, so at the top, you have this rounded ball-like head of the humerus. Okay, it articulates with the glenoid cavity of the scapula. Then right below that, you have the anatomical neck of the humerus. Okay, this is different from the surgical neck. You don't have to know the surgical neck, but it's called the surgical neck because this is where you get a lot of breaks in the humerus. Okay, so we will go down. You will need to be able to differentiate, once again, between the lateral and medial sides of this bone. Okay, so when you're looking at the humerus, we're actually going to skip a couple really quickly. So you have this rounded ball-like projection. This is actually your capitulum, and this is what articulates with the radius. So when we talk about the radius and the ulna, the radius is the lateral bone. Okay, and so since the radius articulates here with the capitulum, you know that this has to be the lateral side of the humerus. Okay, you can remember that the radius articulates with the capitulum if you've ever heard of RC cola. Okay, you just remember RC, radius to the capitulum. Okay, so it's this little ball-like projection on the lateral side. Okay, and then right next to it, this kind of looks like maybe a little hourglass on its side. Okay, this is the trochlea. So this articulates with the ulna. So if you remember UT, okay, then you can remember that the ulna articulates with the trochlea. Okay, so now that we've found that the capitulum is on the lateral side, then we can talk about these epicondyles, okay? So the capitulum and the trochlea are actually the condyles, okay? They are where the articulations are. If you see the word epi means above, okay? So you have these epicondyles that are above the condyles, okay? So this would be your lateral epicondyle and then your medial epicondyle, okay? If you are looking at this humerus trying to differentiate between right and left and anterior and posterior sides, okay, just look for the trochlea and the capitulum, okay, and you can also kind of see the way that the humerus is curved, okay. So right here, this forms the upper part of your elbow, okay, it kind of curves in. On the back side, you have this fossa. Fossa is a groove or depression. You have the olecranon fossa. And this is where your ulna actually sits and forms that elbow joint. Okay, so the ulna kind of rotates around this trochlea to form that hinge joint at your elbow. Okay, so now we'll go back and look at the radius and the ulna. So we will go down. Hey, so you can see here the radius articulates with the capitulum, the ulna articulates with the trochlea. Let's turn it around so that you can see the articulation here, okay, of the ulna right here in this olecranon fossa. Okay. Since you have the olecranon fossa, which is a groove or depression, you have the olecranon process, okay, of the ulna that sits in the olecranon fossa. Okay, so we'll go ahead and look at the radius because that's how it's set up on your word bank. Okay, so on the radius, the hard part about this is trying to figure out which side is medial and which side is lateral. Okay, the easiest way to figure out which side is medial and which side is lateral is if you look at the radial tuberosity. Okay, the radial tuberosity is up at the superior side and it always faces medially. Okay, so this will always face on the inside toward the ulna. Okay, so here you have the head of the radius. It's nice and round and flat on the top. And then right below that, you have the neck of the radius. Okay, here's your radial tuberosity. It always faces medially. And then if you look kind of down at the bottom, okay, you have, let's see if I can turn it, right here, this is the ulnar notch of the radius. Okay, the ulnar notch of the radius is where the ulna actually sits and articulates with the radius. Okay, since the radius is the lateral bone of the forearm, the ulnar notch is always going to be on the medial side. Okay, because the ulna is the medial bone of the forearm. Okay, and then you have this styloid process of the radius. Remember, we had a styloid process of the temporal bone. Okay, this is the styloid process of the radius. And this always is lateral. Okay, you have your wrist bones that sit down here. If the styloid process was on the opposite side, if it was on the medial side, it would be digging down into your wrist bones, and that would not be very comfortable. Okay, so we will exit, and now we will look at the ulna. Okay, so the ulna, you can see, try to zoom in a little more, how it fits right in that ulnar notch of the radius. Okay, let's look at the ulna. The ulna is a pretty easy bone to distinguish because if you look from the side, it has a U for ulna. Okay, so that's an easy way to distinguish the ulna bone. The superior side is pretty distinguishable. So let's see, we talked about the olecranon process. Okay, this is what sits in the olecranon fossa. Okay, then you have your radial notch. If my computer would work with me. Okay, you have your radial notch of your ulna. This is where your ulna articulates with the radius. Okay, the radial notch of the ulna will always face laterally. Okay, remember the ulna is the medial bone of the forearm. The radius is the lateral bone, so the radius would be right over here. Okay, so that radial notch will always face laterally. Okay, so that's a way to help you distinguish between a right ulna and a left ulna. Okay, and then down at the bottom, okay, you have the head of the ulna. Okay, the head is at the bottom. If you take off this little styloid process, the head of the ulna looks pretty similar to the head of the radius. Okay, it's rounded, kind of has a flattened area. Okay, and then look at that, we have another styloid process. So this is the styloid process of the ulnar bone. Okay, once again, like the styloid process of the radius, okay, the ulnar process kind of curves around those wrist bones. Okay, so this styloid process will actually face medially, so that when you have the styloid process of the ulna, the styloid process of the radius, okay, they kind of make a little saddle. They kind of make a little girdle around the top of those wrist bones. So let me show you that real quick. Okay, so you can see kind of in this view how you have the two styloid processes kind of curving around these wrist bones. Okay, that is it for the arm.